where it was interpreted as being good Christianity to put handicapped infants to death. It'll come as the denial of the value of life or the denial of humanness itself. The person not as human or the person's life as not valuable. These are the disguises, and we should expect nothing else. We should not be so naive as to expect a Hitler with a horseman with a sword, or a skeleton with a scythe, you know, and stuff like that. It'll come in the metaphor of our age, in the symbol of our age, in the language that appeals to our age. Already, Oklahoma, at least so I read, and I'm trying to get the bill itself, Oklahoma supposedly has passed a law that the death penalty should be inflicted via an aseptic hypodermic needle. Now, when you come to that, then it's one step further to the medical culture not being only everything else, everything from teacher to, you know, whatever, becoming the executioner as well. Because almost certainly you will end up with a medically trained person administering the fatal injection. Probably a nurse or somebody trained as a medical practitioner or something. Or if you think that concentration camps are from the past, another continent, another age, then let me reassure you, if that's the right word, that we have them in North America right now. Except they look different. They look so different that we don't recognize them. For instance, there's John Cain Hospital, situated in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, right outside Pittsburgh, which has 2,100 residents, or has had 2,100 residents, of whom, for several years going, 1,000 died a year. 1,000 out of 2,100. Yet, this facility, it caters to poor people who are sick or feeble, but have no major acute conditions. You wouldn't get that death rate in open heart surgery, in brain surgery, in kidney dialysis, or what have you. You wouldn't get 1,000 out of 2,100. So the condition of the people, being elderly, or being whatever, it just doesn't explain. So there is death making at a large scale going on. And this facility is run by the county, which is a wealthy county. It's licensed by something that's called the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It is paid for by federal taxes, which I pay by my taxes, support the extermination camp, because they're mostly paid for by federal monies this year. No. Now, this extermination camp is not called an extermination camp. It's called a hospital. The exterminators don't wear black. They wear white. They don't have military ranks. They have professional degrees. RN, PhD, MD, MSW. And they don't wear military insignia on their shoulders. They wear nameplates with their degrees on them on their chests. Or they wear buttons indicating their profession, such as nursing buttons and so on. And over the door, there's no euphemism, as the Nazis used, as recreation center or bathhouse or strength from enjoyment. It says hospital. Now, thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of human service personnel have benefited from the operation of John Cain Hospital. Have enriched themselves, have maintained a middle class or better lifestyle, operating a death camp. Hardly any of them have complained or raised a word. Hardly a whisper of professional protest. And you see, in a perverse way, the Yellow Star had one advantage. You could take a chance, tear it off, and try to pass. Or, as I have seen, you could take a briefcase, go out on the street like this, carry it the way people might carry a briefcase, and you might get away with it. But you can't hide the fact that you're old, poor, and possibly a member of a racial minority. Even highly valued and noble science can become subverted in the service of the beast. I've mentioned the cross. I was stunned when I browsed in the library of the Camp Hill village, and I found that its founder in 1913 described the swastika as one of the perversions of the cross. In 1913, he listed a number of perversions of the cross. In 1913, I couldn't believe it. You know how prophetically foresighted he was. Well, it is of fundamental importance for us to learn to recognize that indeed one of the most deceptive but also favorite disguises of the beast is as its opposite. Its opposite. If you see the beast as Hitler, and if you and you either go and report to Hitler for duty if you like Hitler, or if you don't like Hitler, and you want to nobly combat Hitler, the beast has another disguise for you to capture you coming or going one way or the other. Then you can sign up as a Hitler fighter, which you can do under somebody's flag or the Red Star or whatever. If you see the beast in death-dealing murder, then it may present itself to you for service as a life-saving medical care, which can be just as vicious. Or if technology seems to be the beast, then the beast can dangle in front of your nose another tempting and logical disguise, and that's irrationalism. You have to reject the science that has given power to technology and so on. If authoritarianism and nationalism look like the beast, then the beast will offer you anarchy instead. And so it goes. I mean, I think of the young terrorists in Europe right now. And one of the young women who came from an affluent, well-educated family, you know, was asked, why have you become a terrorist? You kill, you destroy, but no political program. Just destruction, no building. Because the terrorists, even the communists, want nothing to do with them. The communists got a program. There's something they want. They know what they want. The terrorists do not have a program other than to get rid of what is. Burn it down. Well, when she was asked, why did you become a terrorist, she chuckled and said, maybe it was just too much caviar. That was the answer. So anarchy, you see, she sees a rotten, hedonistic society with a lot of things wrong, and reported to duty as an anarchist who kills and destroys. Either way, what's the difference? You are captive of the beast. And that's the disguises of the beast. They'll have one to choose from. If one doesn't please you, then there's another one to pick. Now, what is the beast? Who is it, he or she? And where? Is the beast that can precipitate or perpetrate all this evil always a right-wing fanatic or a left-wing dictator? Or is it an evil government or evil social movement? Or is it a president or prime minister or governor or a head of state? Is it a director of a department? Is it the director of the secret police or the CIA or the FBI? Or is it the director of a department of mental health? Or is it the superintendent of an institution? Or is it the fanatic Iseman? Or a small-time psychopathic ward attendant? Or what? I propose an explanation of the identity of the beast which many people will reject, perhaps as absurd or untrue. And yet I believe that unless and until one understands and believes that answer and acts accordingly, then all one's well-intentioned efforts to combat dehumanization in society and in human services, and all one's well-intentioned efforts to advocate on behalf of devalued people will be essentially futile. So here's where we may be dividing our ways on this faith. I believe if we don't believe the answer that I propose to you, that much of what we do in human service will become an essentially empty gesture, no matter how conscience-salving a gesture may be to oneself. And the answer that I propose to you is that the beast is part of every living human being. And it is not just an evil person far off in power that we read about tens of years later or off in some other foreign country. The beast exists in the heart of every person. And at best, it is latent, subjected, controlled, shackled, perhaps only for the moment, but more commonly the beast is not shackled. It's part of us at all times and at work at all times. While perhaps no one has fully shackled the beast within themselves, some people may... Is that your recorder? Still running? While no one perhaps has fully shackled the beast within themselves, some people may well be the beast in its ugly glory. Now Hitler may have been a full expression of the beast, or Stalin and so on, but not Eichmann. Eichmann was an everyman. And I'll come back to that, because a lot of people have a hard time with that. Also, it's not only political figures who are the beast, but maybe people who are your next door neighbor, your friendly human service planner. When I was a child, there was a sweet little, tiny, skinny little old man with a mustache on my block who ran a tiny stationery store. About as harmless as a mouse, one might think. And then one day, he joined the SA, and after work, he started patrolling the street in his brown uniform, his armband, his jack boots, and he no longer looked so small, skinny, old, or harmless. The beast had given him what he wanted. Now, what is it that you and I want very badly? Now, Eichmann may well have been the beast in one form, but he was a perfect citizen. And that is the profound and disturbing truth. And that's why people don't want it to be true. Eichmann contributed substantially to the destruction of millions of Jews. And yet he was a model citizen in every other respect. Had Hitler not come along, you might very well have held Eichmann up as a model to your children. He was a model husband to his wife, a model father to his children. He obeyed the laws as they were written. He was a man of a certain integrity. Like it or not, he was honest. He didn't lie, he didn't steal. He didn't enrich himself. from his work. He did not pursue or accumulate wealth or possessions or things of this nature. There was just one thing wrong with him. And he was instrumental in the killing of a vast number of Jews whom he did not even hate. He was not even a hateful person. He could have been, and may actually be today, your next door neighbor. And what's more, he could be you or I. Even the Jewish biographer of Iseman, Hannah Arendt, summed up his identity as the banality of evil. The banal, trite, the triteness of evil. To insist, as a lot of people do, especially as Jews tend to do, that Iseman was a monster is profoundly wrong and dangerous, because it tries to devilize an ordinary person and thereby denies the capacity for evil in all of us. That's where the danger is. That evil must always be a far-off monster. And that's exactly part of the beast, to whisper in our ear, that the things we do can't be that. Whatever it is that we do. Now you see, you can kill a monster and then go to sleep peacefully. But only when you know that Iseman is sleeping in your bed, in your neighbor's bed, and is unkillable. Only then do we take the monster, the beast, seriously. As serious as we should. You know that the 16 major Nazi war criminals, including Göring, Hess, Keitel, von Papen, von Ribbentrop, and Speer, all underwent extensive, exhaustive psychological tests. And these tests were unable to detect major psychological aberrancy in these men. When I was in my late 30s, I visited an institution, went into one of the day rooms, so-called, where there were about 70 severely retarded people milling around. They were filthy, they smelled bad, had sticky hands, saliva running down their faces. They're coming up and they're trying to touch me all over, put their hands and arms around me and so on, about 70 of them. And I have a thing about cleanliness. I don't like to be sticky. And I don't like to smell bad. And I'm offended by bad odors. And so on. And that's one of those helpless parts of me. I can work at it, I can resist it, but I can't deny it. At least I'm not going to deny it. What's for real, or I get driven into unconsciousness. And this is, it's terribly dangerous. And when people come up and they smell from stale perspiration, from feces and urine and what have you, it offends me. So I stood in the day room and I contemplated the touches, the smells, the uncontrolled behavior of 70 poorly socialized people. And I had to ask myself, when I was standing there, what would happen to me if I became a worker in this environment and I were placed there with the 70 people who are always there, and they're always conglomerated in a large number. And if all my fellow staff members told me all the time that this is the way people like that are, and nothing can be done, this can be done, that can be done, or this isn't worth it, that isn't worth it, there's no point in teaching this, no point in trying that, and they can't learn, they can't grow, and you'll never have the support of the administration. Nothing you can do in this environment. They're vegetables, and on and on and on and on. Well, I have worked in such an environment. I worked in an institution where out of about 600 employees, 596 said that all the time, from a superintendent on down, with the exception of one nurse, one teacher, and one teacher's aide. That's all the people I could find in about 600 employees who didn't say that. Well, consider if I were placed in such an environment. that I would be always relating to a large number of people at a time, that it would be very difficult to ever really individualize a relationship. So it isn't always one to group, but it's always, where it would be one to one, to a person by name. Even that would be very difficult to do. And then secondly, if all the people whom I value, who are my peers, my identity peers, they speak like I speak, they dress like I dress, they came from where I came from, they look like I look, they smell like I smell, on and on and on and on, if they all told me a consistent message. But these are the people that I ordinarily want to talk to, that I want to eat with, that I want to socialize with, that I look for support, having them tell me that I'm doing something that's right, that's worthwhile, and they would tell me that it isn't right and it isn't worthwhile. And if you knew that they believe all the things that they tell you, they really believe it. Now, standing in that day room, I asked myself two questions. What would I do? And how long would I be able to hold out? Would I be able to reject all positive relationships with my peers and say every day, all day long, with everything I am and do, you are wrong and I'm right. By what I'm going to do, I'm telling the whole rest of you that you're all wrong. All 696 of you are wrong. And I'm right. I'm going to go on day after day saying that you're wrong and I'm right, and doing what says. And that I have to say, and then I don't really care what you think, because I know what I'm doing. And then, when they tell me that I'm out of line, and worse than that if I fail to fall into line, that all sorts of awful things will happen to me. And indeed, I begin to be persecuted, and awful things do happen to me, and I get isolated, and no one will talk to me, and then people start spreading, false stories about me, and on, and attribute all sorts of motivations to what I do and what I am. And I know that they have no other recourse. I know that if they didn't believe what they believe, that they couldn't live with themselves. They couldn't say, whoops, I've done the wrong thing here for 20 years. I've dehumanized these people for 20 years, and tomorrow I'm going to turn over a new leaf. Well, people can't do that. People don't do it. They don't do it because they can't do it. It's very simple. Or else you'd see it happening more often. And you rarely see it happen. Furthermore, that they couldn't live with themselves if they came to believe that they were dealing with valuable human beings who can be different and who should be treated different. They couldn't live with themselves. They couldn't sleep. They couldn't eat. Because they would have to label themselves as offenders, as being war criminals, so to speak, human service criminals in this instance. But they can't do that, and in order to survive, they must destroy that sign of contradiction, which is you. You must be wiped out, or, if I don't wipe that person out, I can't live with myself anymore. Well, these sorts of things happen not just in institutions. They happen in almost any human service agency, different form. They happen in a university all the time. They happen in business and industry. When you think about all the business industries that are involved in destroying the environment, and the person goes in there and says all the rest of you are wrong, it's exactly the same situation. You know that you are infinitely threatened and you must be destroyed in order for other people to be able to live with themselves. Because if you were proven right, then the whole identities and lives would be over. And suppose all of this were your situation. And staying in that day room, I had to tell myself that in all likelihood I would not be able to resist. The day and the time would come and I would buckle under, I would surrender to the beast, I would come around and eventually believe it. If you thought that you can be above that and emancipate yourself from ordinary values and from all of these influences, you'd have to say two things about yourself. Either that you're a saint who is dead to the world. If you can say that to yourself, then maybe you can survive in this environment. Or you're a person of almost superhuman ego strength and of identity. A person that in the past has built up through trial and tribulation such strength and identity that they can resist where almost no one else can resist. And there are a few such people, not very many. Unless you can say, I'm one of those too. Then you have to end up in saying, there's a beast within me. Well, that was not a very pleasant insight when I had to say, no, I don't think I'd be able to resist. Because then I knew there was the beast. And that's good to know. But it's not very pleasant. In 1973, I began to associate myself with a group of people who was trying to advocate on behalf of the elderly. And I found that I had to start all over where I had been 15 years earlier in mental retardation. Square one. I found out that I used figures of speech that expressed the evaluation of the elderly, such as I can't do this or that because I must be getting old. You know, when this is an imagery of aging that's untrue and certainly unnecessary. For years I've been saying I must be getting old when I was forgetting things. When I got tired, I'd say I'm getting old because I'm getting tired. Because getting tired of forgetting things is bad, and if something is bad, we tend to associate it nowadays with old age. It didn't used to be. What we do today. And I didn't realize what I was saying. I don't think anybody else realizes these things. But now I try to make an effort to say when I forget something, oh, I'm forgetting things, so I must be getting young again, like all these forgetful young people can't remember anything. You know, they're getting older, a little more disciplined. Give me a few more years and I'll have that licked, you know. There's as much justification for that interpretation as for the other one. And yet, why do we choose one of these? And the other one is equally valid. It's because we've made an unconscious judgment, value judgment. The point is that everyone has their we and their they. The we's are the goods, the they's are the bads. And whoever the bads is, that varies. I don't know who your bads are, I know who some of my bads are. You know, and for me, it's the Prussians. For someone else, it's Negroes, it's Jews, it's Caucasians, it's this, it's that, it's you know, not always racial and ethnic. It can be the most peculiar people, members of parties, people who look a certain way, or people who talk a certain way, or whatever. But there's a different we and a different they for every person. And every person has their we's and their they's. And when we make that distinction, the beast, you know, has come into his own. The very common we's and they's are based on that, you know. Very commonly, they're the goods, they're the bads. The goods are always the we's. Now, the idea that the beast is part of us is hard to accept. And yet let us look at the extent of the dehumanization in our society. Look at the mass segregation of devalued persons or groups. Special education, for example. We have special segregated school systems, whole school systems, entire systems of schools. Or segregated schools, not systems of schools, or segregated classes. Segregated classes have some rationale. Segregated schools have practically never any rationale. Or take segregated residences. Now, we're beginning to win a few battles here, but in particular mental retardation, but we're losing it wholesale in aging. Because we're seeing a massive and almost unbelievable congregation and segregation of elderly people. And I have little doubt that we'll see euthanasia of the severely handicapped and of impaired newborn and elderly people quite widely. If you have doubts on that, I remind you of a bill that has been introduced. By this time, in some form or another, it has been introduced in the vast majority of the states. Called the Death with Dignity Bill. One that was introduced in Florida said such things as institutional residents lead meaningless lives. They cost the state as much in 1 year as the whole state budget in 4 to 6 years, and they don't really have citizenship. They're non-citizens and they're really non-humans. And these arguments were graciously accepted by the lower house. The lower house passed a bill which stipulated that when a person was incurably or physically incapacitated, then medical treatment could be withheld upon the majority vote of all persons of the first degree of kinship. So, the 5 people can gather and hold a family council, vote 3 to 2 to knock grandmother off. That's it. It's a binding vote. If no first-degree kin can be found within 30 days, you can't even get a letter off in 30 days, the way the post works today. The decision can be made if any 3 physicians concur, and the joker there is that you can find 3 physicians to concur to almost anything. And finally, that was passed in substance by the lower house. Now, don't misinterpret this. It was not passed by the state senate, so it didn't become law. But it passed one of the 2 houses. Someday, somewhere soon, a bill like that will pass both houses. Or some provincial parliament or something. It'll become a law. And the moment it becomes a law, it will be challenged, and if upheld, you'll see laws like that everywhere. Because it only does, by law, what's already practiced. You may not like to hear it, and you may have a hard time believing it, but euthanasia is widely practiced today. A large number of newborn infants are put to death. A large number of severely handicapped people are permitted to die by so-called passive euthanasia, denial of very fundamental life support systems. And elderly people are placed in situations that vastly hasten death. It's interesting that Florida has one of the highest populations of elderly people, and yet that bill passed the lower house. Now, I'll give you a terribly important insight that you must never forget, because it's at the core of an advocacy protection concept. And that is, don't ever expect that just because one group is devalued or oppressed, that group is any nobler than the oppressor, or would not oppress if given a chance themselves. The oppressed may be laying down, stumped under, and if you, the advocate, come with the idea that oppression has ennobled the person, and now you're going to help that person up, and then as a person rises from the ground and stands on their feet, they pull a knife from their hip pocket and stab you in the heart. If you can't face that, then get out of advocacy. You're in the wrong business. Because that's the way the beast within us. And the oppressed would just as lief be the oppressor. And in the human history, indeed, that's what they often aspire to become. The oppressed turn around and become the oppressor. And if you can't face that and do not see the justification for binding the wound of the wounded person, even if they rise up to slay you. You have no business in that. That's the call of the advocate, is to help the oppressed, even if the oppressed would not be grateful or would not be noble. Because you see, you redress an injustice, and two injustices don't make a right. As Tom Suss put it, two wrongs never make a right. They just lay a splendid foundation for a third wrong. You know. So it's important not to romanticize the oppressed, and that is a terrible challenge. And yet, that is a naive myth, especially among liberal thinkers, that a person is ennobled by persecution, by being an underdog. If they were only liberated, they would form a more perfect, a juster society. Well, like I say, confronting the reality of the beast living within us is so hard, but we even have very, very solid empirical studies, such as Milgram's study of obedience to authority, which, as you may remember, you may have read about it or seen the movie or whatever, you remember that they took people in white coats out of the university laboratory, would grab people off the street and say, help us in this experiment on learning. And would put people in a contrived environment where people off the street were asked to administer increasing amounts of electric shock to a presumed learner to make him learn. And as the presumed learner went into paroxysms and began having heart attacks, and the person was told, give the next higher shock, they'd go and do it. And in some instances, the person in there was an accomplice, of course, was acting it all out. The person in there was going through heart attack indications and fainting away and might have been dead. And the people off the street, some of them with tears streaming down their face, would give the next higher shock. And very few people resisted. Very few people walk out or report to the police or whatever. Most people right off the street can be persuaded by legitimized authority to become killers. In another study at Stanford, they showed that you can take a class of students, divide them randomly into two groups, one called prisoners and the other one called guards, and set up a dummy prison. Within 24 hours, they had to terminate the experiment because the guards were beginning to brutalize the prisoners who were accepting the brutalization as being part of their role. And the professors had to get up in the middle of the night and terminate the experiment, which was getting out of hand. This is particularly hard to accept for people within a certain intellectual tradition that's widely prevalent in academia that holds one of its implicit and sometimes explicit tenets that humans are basically good and perfectible. And then what they need primarily in order to become perfect and good is brains and more education. That's the dogma. It's very common. I think most people believe it. A little more social evolution, we sometimes hear talked about. Look how far we've come, just a little more, and we'll be able to abolish all these things. The argument goes, since humans come with a great deal of intelligence to start with, and we can shape education, and since evolution during the last several thousand years has not been biological as much as social anyway, then all we need is a little more social engineering. A few more things like maybe the United Nations, UNESCO, the World Court, these are social engineering mechanisms. And then reason will triumph. And reason, it is said, is good and moral. Eventually, people then will no longer wage wars. They will solve problems in a rational and equitable fashion. Equitable and rational societies will be created. And all of that will be virtually inevitable. And in all of this, we'll use a little technology such as game theory. Instead of going to war, we'll play war games, and we'll solve by computers right and wrong. People will give up their national identity. Nations will give up their sovereignty. They'll beat their swords into plowshares, and they study war no more. And then there'll be an equitable distribution of wealth, of income, of resources. And some people say, well, just look at Scandinavia, where much of this already exists. And that's just a foretaste of things to come. Now, I can't emphasize strongly enough how widely held this set of beliefs is, how common it is. It's expressed in political processes, in ideology, in entire ways of functioning of people. And in essence, it makes a religion of rationality and sees the inhumanity of the ages as irrationality rather than as sin, so to speak. Now, this liberal intellectual tradition has much to commend it. It does tend toward a humane approach to social affairs, toward the production of progressive laws, toward a more equitable allocation of resources, and so on. But aside from the fact that this vision is a phantom, there's another problem associated with it. A fascinating one, when you think about it deeper. And that is that this particular tradition itself has never come to grips with certain issues of human impairment, despite the fact that it strongly tends toward passive social legislation and other measures and towards strong public financing of human services, which is almost reflexive of this ideology. I have not seen a great deal of evidence that this tradition has been able to live up to the challenge of valuing and respecting people. This is very important. People who have the type of handicap which makes it impossible for them to engage in the intellectual and educational process that this tradition sees as the salvation of mankind. You get the point? If the tradition sees education and intellect as human salvation, then what about the people who are seen as stupid, ignorant, unintelligent, ineducable? And that is what this tradition has never been able to really come to grips with. And we can see it in its politics. Where such traditions are prominently expressed or in governing circles and so on, we see a great deal of difficulties coming to grips with retarded people, with elderly people who are no longer perhaps too apt at certain societal problem solving and things of this nature. Instead, what we often see then is a very extensive and interestingly often a very expensive devaluation of those persons who are intellectually and educationally limited, especially the mentally retarded and the elderly. Because these are then the people who are perceived as holding to old and reactionary ideas, as being not bright enough to understand the liberal tradition, not bright enough to contribute to it, or as having lost the capacity after having once possessed it. So therefore we see little opposition within this tradition to the segregation of such people. In fact, we see segregation fostered. And that's exactly what we see, for example, in aging. It's this tradition, intellectual liberal tradition, that's all in favor of segregated housing so often, or of nursing homes, or segregated schooling for retarded people, and so on. Provision of services is seen as humanistic, but integration is seen as almost perhaps even as dangerous. So we see more hospitals, more this, more that, but we don't necessarily see more valuation, more integration, more sharing of life, more genuine equality between the person who's intellectually talented and the person who's intellectually limited. And here we have to keep in mind that segregation, congregation of elderly people, is one of the very subtle forms of the beast, because it is done in the name of humanity, good medical practice, religion, and so on. and that's of course the same reason why a number of now very popular types of destruction of life are supported by the very same concepts and arguments, such as abortion and euthanasia. There's another major tradition which is almost the opposite. You can call it the inborn beast theory, if you wish, or something like that, which holds that humans have a mean streak built into them, perhaps because they're part animal. Maybe because of the fact that by adaptive evolution, rivalry has been built into human relations. Maybe competition, striving for dominance. Maybe killing has been built into human beings because humans do eat flesh. To me, that is one of those obvious realities that people can't come to grips with. Even if you're a vegetarian, you're still a flesh eater. As a human being, you're just denying yourself something, but we're constituted as flesh eaters. Well, where do you think flesh comes from? By crying out loud. You know, now today you can deceive yourself as to where it comes from, but flesh has to be killed. And at one time, in our origins, it had to be killed in a very, very primitive, brutal way. So maybe for these and other reasons, humans have built into their very nature, indeed, something of the beastly, whatever you want to call it. And of course, at this point, a lot of ethologists and some anthropologists have increasingly viewed it in this fashion. Now, there's one other aspect which I find a little difficult to interpret at times, but I think again it fundamentally bears on that. And that is that the material world we live in is a world of physical force. You look at any object, but actually there are molecules floating around. There's motion, and it's force that holds it together. It is force that repels, force that attracts. And that force exists in the whole universe, controls the movements of the biggest humanly body, of the heavenly bodies, down to what I am made of. And like a piece of flesh, there are forces holding it together. Physical forces. Now, the physical universe, then, has this principle within it. And it's a principle which means that the forces of different extent are vectors. Some are more powerful than others. And it's a very primitive sort of a process. You know, when two forces, so to speak, collide, then certain predictable things happen. There is a conflict. There is either an annihilation or an amalgamation, or a new direction, a vector in physics is created, or stronger force triumphing over weaker force, and on and on and on and on like this. Now, if we translate this as to what does force become, force in the physical universe, what does it become in social affairs? Well, force in social affairs is violence, in a sense. And to me, it's very obvious, at least, that to the degree that we are physical, that we're part of a physical universe in which we're only playing out socially rules of force, so to speak, and that therefore social violence is part of being made of matter. When we have a human body, we are subject to the physical forces. Now, you throw one body against another body, somebody gets hurt, and on and on. And that's one of the reasons why we must expect beastliness within us. You see, Why the inborn beast to me is a self-evident reality of the world. And again, I'll say that is a fundamental issue to this whole workshop. Because if one believes that, one will do totally different things in human services and human service structuring and planning than if one believes that salvation through intellect or whatever is just around the corner, or salvation through social evolution, or salvation through a little social engineering. Our ways divide on how we would approach human services then. And one of the problems why we don't see that, well, first of all, we aren't taught it. Secondly, on the other hand, we are taught often just the opposite. The fact that we can look at human history and see a history of violence. And that's human history, is violence, violence, violence. Whatever good there is, but with it at all times is violence. Now, if somebody comes, the famous visitor from Mars talk about it, comes and looks at our history, that is one of the things that they would, by force, being rational people, not caught in our mentalities, have to conclude, is those earthlings are, by nature, violent people. Now, earthlings will deny it. They say, you're wrong! Or, you're wrong, Martians, you're wrong. We're really good. Well, the Martian says, I'm sorry, all I see, I'm reading your history. I got 5 million years of history here. You only got 7,000. I got 5 million here. And through all the 5 million years, while people have been kind to each other, but overridingly, particularly when you get together with each other, groupings, then you inflict violence on other groupings, especially then. And that's written right here. We'd have a hard time proposing our other tradition in any objective debate on the issue. And also, the other reason why we often don't see it is because violence expresses itself so subtly over a long period of time that it escapes our rational analysis. When we look back at history, you look at Bismarck, was held up as a big German hero because he united the German nation for the first time, really. And he had to fight 3 wars to do it. He fought the Danes, beat down the Danes, and took part of German-speaking country away from them. He fought the Austrians, and he fought the French, and built a German nation. And then everybody says, well, look, that's what England did, what France did, what Italy did. They all went to that period of building a unified nationhood, and everywhere else it was called a good thing, that this was achieved. People say it's a good thing that there's Canada and the United States and whatever. And yet, it took almost 100 years now to see that what Bismarck did resulted in what we have today. The world with Marxism, and we have now 25 Germanys. Germany divided into a lot of little Germanys, and then little bits of Germanys floating around in almost every European country that there is. And all of Bismarck's wars have left a divided, disunited, divided, dismembered Germany. Now, who would have thought that after he won his 3rd war? Everybody said, it took 3 wars of violence to bring about something good. In retrospect, tells us it would have been better to leave things alone with all the disadvantages. But we don't see that. Human beings today don't say all the troubles of our world are derived from those 3 wars. So we can't analyze it. And this is one little example of what happens to us all the time, where we cannot analyze these deeply subtle historical forces that lead to violence. Today, we have in our possession, as human beings, I've counted them up, 11 means for bringing civilization to an end. 11. Most people think of only one. They think of nuclear war. But that's wrong. We have 11. Several of these have the power to end all higher life on Earth. All higher life on Earth. Several of these 11 means. I submit to you that there is zero, absolutely nothing within the empiricism of human history to permit any other rational conclusion. Rational conclusion. You can have irrational conclusion, but no other rational conclusion can be drawn from human history other than what human beings can do, they will do, and what means and methods human beings possess, they will use and exercise. Always have. Always have exercised what they can, done what they were capable of doing. So for the world to survive, human beings today would for the first time ever have to do something they've never ever done before. Deny themselves. Deny nuclear energy. And they're not going to do that. That decision has been made. Deny biological research. Unpredictable areas like recombinant DNA and stuff like that. They will not. That decision has been made. We go on and on and on as to the things we deny. So there are profound implications to these different views. They're almost decision theory implications. What happens if theory A is right or wrong? And we act consistently with it. Or we act with theory B and it is right or wrong. Decision theory would suggest, in fact it would dictate, that we have more to gain and less to lose if we're conservative in our assumptions. In other words, that we assume that human beings are more apt to have a streak of meanness than they are apt to merely require a little bit of social engineering to do things right. For everything that we know, that is the safer, the more conservative assumptions upon which to build structures, because it would compel us to do something which probably won't hurt, so to speak, but might prevent a catastrophe. Namely, would compel us to institute safeguards and mechanisms of a societal nature that will protect human beings anticipatorily from whatever meanness may reside within them. See, that is the major conclusion. This is what social advocacies is all about. Social advocacies are mechanisms which we should develop many of, but as many as we can grasp at. Because the worst that can happen is that we won't need them. They will install them. We have undergone some inconvenience and expense in installing them and maintaining them. And the worst will happen is, well, thank God we'll never need them. We'll never use them, but they're there. But on the other hand, if they're not there when we do need them, then what? Then we'll have major social catastrophes, such as we have had, and are having now, and probably will continue to have. Segregation, dehumanization, concentration camps, wars, and so on. So I would much rather have those mechanisms there and not need them than not have them there when the beast comes crawling out of its hole. And these mechanisms are of a nature which help us confront the very structures that we create. The structures that we create, such as the state. We create the state. The state will have the beast within it. And therefore we must also create the safeguards against the state, which is against ourselves. Again, it's hard for people to accept. The safeguard is against me. That's the point. The agencies that we create. We create those agencies. We create, you name it, social work agencies, institutions of special education and so on. They're our creatures. They have our beast within them, and they need the safeguards set up against them and against us. The legislatures that we create, they're our creation. They need the safeguards and so on. But in addition, social advocacies includes mechanisms and processes which increase the likelihood that we confront ourselves. We remind ourselves consciously of the lurking beast within us at all times. The highest and perhaps the only genuine form of social advocacy is that which accepts a never-ending commitment to doing things the hard way. This is going to come up throughout the workshop over and over and over. And you will often be frustrated and exasperated with me when you ask me for the simple, easy solution. And I'll be endlessly telling you that there is none. And that's what we're called for, to that commitment. That there are no easy, cheap, simple solutions. It's a commitment to doing things the hard way, the painful way. Always going to be hard and it's going to hurt. The way that lays my soul open to the light, which is not very pleasant, because sometimes there's things within my soul that don't want to see the light of day. And a commitment to things which encourage my brothers and sisters to pull that long, long beam out of my own eye. Now, is any discussion, questions on this module before we break? Would you tell us who you are and from where you're from?
I would like to know if you discussed euthanasia. Do you also view artificial means of continuing life as a rationalized evil, in a sense?
Yes.
Justified
Yes, I think it could be another form of the beast, a disguise. So it's very common. You see people who are so morally outraged by death making, as I call it, that they go to the other extreme, and they would torture people to keep a semblance of life going, and that's the other extreme.
And what about self-chosen? In a situation where you find yourself suffering and you want to die, you consider that euthanasia, or you consider that suicide?
We have to distinguish between a legal and a moral situation. Strangely enough, the law, later on we'll talk about the roots of guardianship, the law does not consider human beings the owner of themselves. They belong to the state, the body politic, so to speak. And therefore, generally, the law has ruled that it has disapproved of self-destruction. Now, I would disagree legally. I would give people a legal right to destroy themselves, but I wouldn't. I would say morally. You can see the implication that if you build a body social in such a way that people will be called upon and legitimized in assisting others to what you might call an unnatural death. You're running into a paradigm, so to speak, into how do you know?